1 or 2 more minutes for people who are just... This is the third webinar in the series since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. In previous webinars, we've covered the theme generally of providing person-centered dementia care, picking up themes around autonomy and preference. Today, I'm joined with panelists in the previous webinar, colleagues and friends, Jim Kinsey from Planetree International and co-founders of Person-Centered Universe, Ashley King and Daphne Noonan. Just to reflect, our lives are already often so packed, and then something so extraordinarily challenging has come along. Many of us have lost control. We feel vulnerable. Our loved ones feel vulnerable. People in our care are more vulnerable. There's more uncertainty day to day. There's more uncertainty about the future. There's lots of change taking place. There's a lot of limits on what we can do. And this is likely to continue. But we're tough and we're doing our best. But of course, this is all very stressful. And this is what today's session is about. Very honored and pleased to be joined by our special guest today, Dr. Irwin-Kenyon. Gary is the founding chair and professor of the Gerontology department at St. Thomas University, Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. He's also a fellow of the Andrew Noonan Institute for Advanced Studies in Gerontology and Geriatrics at the University of Southern California. Today, we'll focus very much on so much of the knowledge that he shared in his latest book, Pathways to Stillness. But he's also authored, co-authored, and co-edited 6 other books, such as Narrative Gerontology, Storying Later Life, Restoring Your Life, and Ordinary Wisdom. So he's really, in my view, so far ahead of the curve. I mean, he's also designed a program of Tai Chi and narrative care, which he's been teaching for the past 10 years to special groups and residents in long-term care. He's also had workshops in North America, Europe, and Asia. Just before I hand over to Gary, just wanted to mention a little bit of the housekeeping. So you'll notice that the microphones are muted. There'll be a short Q&A session about 2/3 the way through. You're very welcome to type in your questions into the chat box down at the bottom of the panel. And we may try to open the mics, let's see, when you have a question to ask. And just to say that after the end of the session, my colleagues from Person-Centered Universe will send out a takeaway, which is a summary of some of the information and links to resources to think further on the issue or subject of stillness. We were discussing in the preparation to today's session what could be expected as a takeaway. We thought we're confident enough to say that if you haven't been using stillness techniques up to now, that perhaps after today's session you could begin to use stillness techniques to help slow things down, find calm, peace, joy, and as a consequence be more resilient and able to manage so many of the stresses that we're faced with, especially in these extraordinary times. I want to, if I may, hand over now to Gary and ask him to give us an introduction to the topic of stillness as an experience.
Thank you very much, Rahzeb. Just a slight thing, my last name, I have a short version and a longer version. Irwin-Kenyon. Yeah. So I think that's what it is on the slide too. So, well, thank you very much for your kind invitation to share my insights at this important event. I wish us all patience and peace at this time, and perhaps the gift of seeing some beauty and love in this life and maybe even some humor. I was thinking about humor directed to myself, that I'm in bad need of a haircut. But the top of my head, it doesn't really affect too much because there's not much going on there. But the sides and the back really are in need of some improvement, as with most of us, I imagine. It's particularly a special honor to be presenting with Daphne and Ashley, both graduates of our gerontology program at St. Thomas University, and also Rachel. You and your colleagues are doing such excellent and meaningful work. A major lesson from this pandemic time is that we all need to care for ourselves as well as loved ones or those in our care. In other words, we need to practice self-compassion. We cannot do it all, and we need each other for support. Loving and caring for others involves loving and caring for ourselves. As teachers such as the Dalai Lama, Henry Nouwen, and Jean Vanier point out, helping others from a place of guilt, exhaustion, or a fearful or heroic attempt to save a broken world may not serve you or others well. We need to be reminded about this regularly. Also, is this not what we as professionals advise caregivers of dementia survivors, for example, to do? Make sure you care for your own needs as well. To put it candidly, a burned out care partner cannot be of help to either themselves or others. In these times, there is a danger that emergency care and basic needs will overshadow the need for narrative care, for caring for meaning and the personal story of this experience. We need to be reminded that narrative care, that is the person, is core care, C-O-R-E. It's equal in importance to medical care or psychosocial care. It is even more important in this time to stop, be present, take a break, and bring mindfulness or stillness to your life situation. We are all doing our best, but we also need to learn to be. How do we do this? We stop and we rest. We just need to show up for stillness to appear. It is already there. Just let go and give up control. Look inside yourself and observe your breath. It's that simple, although not that simple when you practice it. Stillness is a natural part of who we are, but it gets covered over by busyness, even if well-intentioned. We are a body, a thinking mind, and a spirit. The spirit shows up when the thinking mind slows down. It is an experience available to us all, but not by thinking. Mindfulness and stillness are about taking a step back and witnessing your story. It creates a peaceful space between you and all the events, thoughts, and emotions that swirl around inside and outside of you. Stillness helps you move with change, and radical change, as we are experiencing now. But you cannot make stillness happen. It has its own rules. However, you can set up conditions for the emergence of stillness in your life. Those conditions involve, again, letting go, acceptance, yielding, giving in, which is not giving up, allowing, surrendering. In our usual way of going about life, we talk about the 3 fight, flight, freeze, which is our animal heritage. We need control and become fearful when we do not have it, and we become afraid that the lion will eat us. Stillness adds a 4th dimension, follow. This is the hallmark of Tai Chi, but really all spiritual traditions, including the 12-step program. We stop, step back, give up some control, and are open to what happens and to what is a larger picture. Letting go and acceptance are not a sign of weakness. Rather, they are a sign of strength, courage, and wisdom. Still, most of us are brought to stillness through suffering. Our lives become unmanageable, and we realize we cannot go it alone. Many spiritual figures say that this is a positive side of the pandemic. Perhaps not everyone wants to hear that, but many of us will be brought closer to stillness, which is our real self, and share that with others. Increasingly, neurobiological research is showing how stillness practice helps strengthen the cerebral cortex and weaken the fear-based limbic animal brain. It's very interesting, fascinating research that continues to grow. We are evolving to kindness, compassion, love, and caring, but not by overdoing, which invites stress and burnout. Especially in this extreme situation we find ourselves now, we need to bring stillness to the biographical encounter that is person-centered care. Story listening, which I talk about as one word. Being present to each other and listening to each other's stories. The magical soul-to-soul connection that nourishes us all sometimes only requires a momentary meeting in presence of two persons. These moments can make us feel that all is well, that there is nothing to do and nowhere to go. And in this biographical encounter of presence, we both have a stillness experience. These times can make us feel even more alone and truly isolated. It's not rocket science, but we need to remember to try to be more with each other. And the payoff is that we are all brought together in love and presence. At this point, I'd like to turn things back to Rahzeb.
Thanks so much, Gary. Thank you very much. In the next portion, Daphne, Ashley, Jim, and I will share a few short stories of our experiences in the recent past to help reflect on the different things that are taking place and how these have either called on us for stillness or have helped us to discover stillness. Could I ask Daphne to share her story?
Hi, I'm just making sure everyone can hear me.
We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So hi, thank you, Rahzeb. It's an honor to be presenting with all of my fellow panel members today, and particularly on this topic, which I think is incredibly relevant to me personally anyway this week. So when we were looking at putting together this collection of stories, I chose to talk about an experience that happened at the nursing home that I work at in New Brunswick, Nashwauk Villa in Stanley. And we are, like everyone else, many healthcare organizations over the last 10 weeks or so have seen so many changes. And obviously the big ones, you know, the obvious ones are what you would think of when you think about carrying stress. So things like, you know, having no visitors or trying to accept a new admission into a nursing home or a hospital during a time when things are locked and closed, and, you know, palliative care and things like that. Those are the kind of very, I would say, big ones, more obvious ones that we are experiencing collectively as a healthcare sector and around the world, really. But one of the things that really made me think a few weeks ago, we actually made a decision early on to kind of close off areas of our building. So we closed off the resident area from kind of the staff, like administrative area. And our home is usually a very bustling place. And so that was obviously a decision that was made, you know, 10 weeks ago when we didn't know a lot of things. We didn't know how serious the situation was going to be in terms of hitting our province with COVID. We also didn't have necessarily adequate PPE, like surgical masks and things. And so it was a decision that we made, and it was, you know, kind of didn't even think about it. And so several weeks later, we came to the conclusion that, you know, things had changed and that we could reevaluate that particular decision about opening up the fire doors again, so that people could easily pass through. And the day that we actually did it as by request of our staff, and the staff were, said like, would that it be possible that we could potentially open the doors again, now that, things have changed. And so when we opened the doors, the day that we did it, it was such a powerful experience. Everybody was just, it was like we were floating on air. It was the happiest day that we had experienced in, the better part of 2.5 months. And it was, so I guess the relevance to the particular topic that we have, that we're talking about today of that story is that it was very powerful for myself and the other members of the leadership team here at the nursing home, that we didn't even realize how much stress that one tiny thing was causing in our lives. So, we were thinking about the more obvious ones, the things I mentioned earlier, but it's little things like that, and just the power of, I guess how much stress we're carrying around as a result of this situation that we don't even, have an awareness of, or maybe we aren't acknowledging. So anyway, I would share that.
Thanks, Daphne. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My own story is one about just how the loss of structure has affected me. It's made things more stressful. So I sometimes complain about the production line that is life. My partner Hester and I are getting the kids ready for school 5 days a week, and and you're on the treadmill and you're just having to knock things out. But then, I forget, I have a little bike ride here, push bike ride to work, and somehow that splits things from dropping the kids off to getting to work. And then when I come to the office, I see my friends and colleagues. And then in the evening, I go back and, I do a few things. We have dinner together, and I often go training. I do a lot of Kung Fu. So I go training and I see my friends there, and we're able to actually touch each other. And, we have a few laughs, and I get rid of some of that kind of energy that I build up from thinking too much in the day. And then I go back and Hester's there and we have a chat and so on. And then suddenly everything changed, everybody's stuck at home together. We're teaching kids at home. We became the teachers. We're teaching them on a screen, and we don't know how long that lasts for. And then there's the intensity of, work changes. There's more uncertainty. Hester couldn't work. So the structure just went, and these little things that I have built in, like my bike rides from here to there, and seeing friends, touching each other, just making contact with you, just these little things, they're all gone. And the longer it goes on, actually, the more you miss it. I saw a friend a couple of weeks ago. It was good weather. He came by. We went to the garden, and he lives alone as an artist in his studio. And it really became apparent that he actually hadn't had any physical contact with anybody else for something like 10 weeks. And I could see it on him. I could just see that there was just more tension in how he was moving on his face. And I wanted to give him a hug, but he wanted to go to see his parents, and I just couldn't. I wasn't allowed, as it were. And so the loss of structure and just the loss of just these little things that you can do to that you don't even think of as things that relax you in life. That's really my story. How that's been stressful in some ways. Could I ask Ashley to pick up the thread here and share her story, her reflections?
Thank you so much for sharing, Daphne and Rahzeb. And when I started to reflect on, what are the stressors that I'm currently operating under, and what is causing me stress, aside from my personal health and well-being, I, like many of us on the webinar today, I'm sure, am in an executive role in a long-term care home. So listening to you, Daphne, speak about the complexity of your staff and their stressors, as well as your story, Rahzeb, about the stressors at home, they really resonate with me. Because as in leadership, we're constantly expected to manage the demands of operating an organization, and often with multi-million-dollar budgets and hundreds of staff. So on a regular day, even before COVID, it can be a stressful experience, as you can imagine, or as you're probably living. So adding in the requirements of family, friends, and keeping, maintaining our health, even before COVID, those executive or executive level jobs are stressful. We thrive on and live through stress. So I really recognized the impact of the stress that I was enduring, and that for the first few weeks to a month that we were kind of coming into this pandemic, I wasn't able to identify the sheer weight of not only managing the day-to-day aspects of management and leadership within an organization, and setting policy and direction and ingenuity, but I started to look at the additionally holding the weight of the safety, the risk management, and the well-being of hundreds of staff and residents or patients who are under our care. So everything I've done since February and March has been in the spirit of keeping people alive, keeping people well, and supporting the complex emotions of so many who look to me and my colleagues to lead us through this pandemic. So as a leader, I want to have the answers in my day-to-day life. I seek to find the answers, but in so many circumstances, especially as we're moving through this new normal or moving to this new normal, I don't have all the answers and I can't give all the answers. So it really wasn't until I began preparing for this webinar that I recognized the immense amount of stress and honestly resilience that we all have within our roles of leadership. So during the unprecedented change and uncertainty, staff and residents and patients and family members are looking to us to remain calm, to work to find solutions, and to communicate effectively and efficiently. And I'm here to tell you it's absolutely not an easy task. And our roles are far from easy. At this time, we don't have the luxury of getting back on the hamster wheel, as they say, of daily mundane tasks. But as we round out 3 months of living under the new normal, that is the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm very acutely aware, as my colleague Daphne puts it so well very often, that we are now under a marathon. We're living a marathon and not a sprint. And so our own mental health and well-being is so very important to keeping us doing our best day in and day out for our patients or residents and the staff that we care for. So I share that story not because I don't come to it with a solution, but more so a recognition that that stress it's true and it's real and it's there. And I'm hopeful that we can find ways to support ourselves and support each other in making it through this very challenging time and very stressful time.
Thank you, Ash. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Could I ask Jim to pick up the thread here?
Thank you, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. Much of my time in the last 3 months has been somewhat different than many of yours. And my role prior to the pandemic was to assist sites with the implementation of person-centered care. And with the pandemic, my role is shifted dramatically. And what it has shifted to is really experiencing with many of my colleagues and many of you on the call this afternoon, this pandemic through the eyes of their staff, through the eyes of their leadership, and doing what I can to support and to guide and to move people through each day. What has struck me rather hard over the last few months is, particularly in long-term care, how we have spent so many months asking caregivers to do so much more. And not surprisingly, they rose to the occasion. Not surprisingly, they did what they have dedicated their lives to doing. And as I reflect upon what many of their experiences have been over the last few months and what many of them have actually shared with me personally, some of the things that concern me is what happens on the other side of this pandemic. What happens in this quote unquote new normal. And, so many caregivers and so many leaders have been dealing with just an enormous amount of grief and unprecedented change. And we have asked our long-term care staff and professionals in the past to act as surrogate family members, but never more than now have we asked for that. And so many nurses and nursing assistants and resident care attendants have shared with me stories of holding hands at the end of life while a family is on FaceTime or while a family is on the cell phone or whatever. And to feel like that is a sacred space, but then to feel as if they had to move to the next thing. Because as many of us know, it doesn't just stop and allow us to hold that sacred space for more than a moment. And many of the folks that I've talked to really just relayed stories of just trying to push through the day so that then they could get home to their families, where the worry was compounded by more issues like some of my friends shared today. And I think about how people continue to show up day after day. And I think one of the things that just kept coming back to my mind as I prepared for this afternoon was, how do we do it different in the future? And, kind of thinking about what needs to change in terms of how we view elder care in North America and other countries, how we treat and empower caregivers, how we give nobility back to a role that clearly deserves it. And in thinking about the topic and in reading Gary's book, it is my hope that if we can find stillness, and that if we can be in that stillness, we can find our voice to stand up and to require things to be different, and to, in that stillness, find that power so that we can recognize the value of each life that we care for and that we care with. Gary.
Thanks so much. In a moment, I'll ask Gary to pick up the thread and look at these stories that we've just articulated and think about how you can find your own methods, your own ways and formal ways of having pathways to stillness. Just mention that Gary will probably do that for about 10-15 minutes, and then there'll be a short Q&A. So you're very welcome to start typing in questions if you have them already. That'll be about 5 minutes, the Q&A, and thereafter Gary will guide us through a short stillness exercise, just as a concrete example of using a stillness technique. Okay. Could I ask Gary to pick up the thread?
Thank you, Rahzeb. And thank you for those very powerful stories, Jim, Rahzeb, Daphne, and Ashley. These existential or on-the-ground stories we have just heard are excellent examples of the many settings where bringing stillness to our personal and professional lives can be of great benefit during this very turbulent time of radical change and really much suffering. And I would add what Jim was referring to, our journey to find meaning in that suffering. With these stories in the background, I would now like to discuss an approach to finding stillness, which is based on my book, Pathways to Stillness. I say an approach because what I have to offer here is not 6 steps to wisdom and immortality. There is no one-size-fits-all instruction book. The journey is to discover your own pathways with help. So how do we find stillness in such chaotic times? There are many pathways to moments of stillness. Some practices, you could call them stillness practices as well, are more formal. A simple one that's quite effective, and you might want to try it later, is to close your eyes, place your hand on your heart, and breathe into that area, even for a few minutes. Just deep breaths in and out from your heart area. Just follow your breath in and out. You need not practice for an hour. Try even a 2 or 3 minute practice to relax into stillness. The point is, or the helpful guide to this is that the more you do this, the more your spirit will remind you to take that break. So it need not be long sessions, but short ones more often. The formal ones, I'll just mention some, are yoga, Tai Chi. Tai Chi is one of my main stillness practices as moving meditation. Sitting practice or walking meditation that Thich Nhat Hanh, for example, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, talks a lot about. Prayer. These practices may also be called refuges, whether they are people, places, situations, or even thoughts. Refuges work because they bring you to the present moment, where there is no fear and no anxiety. It's hard to believe, but when you find yourself there even for a moment, it works. As my daughter Christina says, they give my head a break. You may find that allowing yourself these moments of stillness helps you to be better at work and better in relationships at home. I invite you to slow down and take a few moments to explore your own pathways. Are there stillness refuges that you already use? Is there a new one you can think of? This pathway could be anything that has personal meaning for you, that gives you a break and some comfort. Returning to today's stories for a moment, Jim's story reminds us to take moments alone or with others to grieve. This is a stillness practice that is urgently needed in our culture, especially now. It could be a webinar of its own. I teach a full course at St. Thomas University in Fredericton here on death and dying, and it is always fully enrolled with students who have, for many different reasons, found their way to be curious to learn more about this aspect of human life, honoring and giving meaning to the end of life, or changing our story about what death means to you or to all of us as a culture. Daphne's story shows us that slowing down, taking a breath, can allow a new pathway to emerge that didn't exist before. It's not a technique, but allowing a space in the usual reasoning mind of trying to solve problems. The taking a break brings a measure of stillness to all the characters in this story. we step back and get a larger picture of the situation. It's very powerful to me that just opening a door, which can also be looked at as a symbol of light or freedom, even if you don't even go through the door, but it's something that no one was aware of until that moment, as well as the depth of stress that everyone was feeling. Here are some pathways that students and readers of my book have shared. One is called biking. A friend of mine recently lost his wife. I gave him a copy of my book. He thanked me, but after a few days he said, "You know, Gary, this is very interesting, but I'm more interested in technical manuals, fixing and building things like cars. I do not understand stillness." I said, "That's fine. Different strokes for different folks." We talked a bit longer, and I said, "See you later." Then about a week later, he called me and said, "You know, I was thinking when I'm on my e-bike in the woods, moving fast and furiously over the trails, I do not think of anything. My mind is clear and I'm not stressed. Is that stillness?" I said, "You got it. Stillness is not just about sitting cross-legged, what one of my friends calls cross-legged immobility." Another friend, Rob, says that a favorite stillness activity for him is cutting the fields on his tractor. He says stillness can be noisy. It is acoustically enhanced stillness, to use his words, and in hot pursuit of flow. Then there is one I call nature without a purpose. The next time you can, go to a park, the woods, the seaside, somewhere quiet in nature. Turn off your devices. Try a relax into stillness movement, perhaps. Then sit quietly and listen and feel what is around you. Let nature share its stillness with you, rather than you trying to do something with it. Other pathways I could mention are gardening. This is a pathway my wife would dearly wishes that I would pick up more. A couple from Deepak Chopra: pet your cat. Talk to someone who warms your heart. Another one that's in my book is a 2-meter coffee with someone, which I call a barista stillness refuge. Thinking about some of the stories we heard, Rahzeb's story about people being alone. I have a group of people I have coffee with at a cafe in Fredericton all the time. And several of us, several of them, do live alone. We managed to get together a couple of weeks ago, 2 meters apart outside. And one of my colleagues, one of my friends, said that this was so important to him that getting together for coffee was a lifeblood for him. And he sorely missed those connections. Another one could be reading, or a hobby, a past hobby that you might explore and revisit, a present hobby, or a new interest. There are many podcasts out there now that deal with things from anxiety, stress, to finding peace and stillness. Some are listed on the resource page that you will be given. Create a Zoom meeting with friends, FaceTime, or just do nothing. These examples of stillness or pathways to stillness are intended to help you prime the pump, as my mentor Jim Beeren used to say. And at this point, again, I will turn things back to Rahzeb with a quote: "Stillness is an adventure in going nowhere."
Thanks so much. Thank you. It's really so down to earth and powerful. Thank you. Thank you. Now I want to, if I may, open up for a short Q&A session. We wondered whether there would be any questions at this point. We thought that it may be one of those Q&As where people just use a moment to reflect on all those things, all the things being said. But if there are any personal stories that you'd like to share, or any thoughts that you have about stillness practices that have worked for you, then you're very welcome to open your mic or ask a question. I have sure, Daphne. Could we open the mic for Daphne?
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to, I know there are many colleagues who are on our webinar today who are from, our Planetree and our Pioneer Network circles and in New Brunswick as well, the person-centered care culture change folks. And it just struck me, Gary, while you were talking, you were giving me, some of those practical examples that there's a quote that we often use in person-centered care world that it's one of our favorite quotes, and it talks about the fact that person-centered care is not rocket science. And it just struck me that that quote also very much applies to what you were saying. We spend a lot of time, we want person-centered care, or we want it to be rocket science. We want, busy ourselves in the doing and the checking off the checklist and whatnot, but really it's not about that at all. So I just wanted to kind of draw that point for some of our kindred spirits on the call.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Daphne. I have a comment from Janet Winchester. Could I ask her to share it? If Rachel, could you open the mic for Janet Winchester? Sure, Janet, you're welcome to read it.
Hi, I'll just read it. It's not really.
Sorry, if I could just interrupt. Could I just ask you to say where you're from?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm from Boulder, Colorado. I work in a PACE model of caring for the very fragile elders who still live at home, some of them, and some in assisted living, some in SNFs. And I'm an OT, and I made the transition to working at home and thought I was doing fine, had no idea how much stress I was having, and was diagnosed with shingles at the beginning of April. And realized I was carrying a lot of stress, and I had put a lot on myself to being as productive as I had been trying to be in the office, and it just really stopped me cold. I still had to work full time, and I would take naps during the day, just little short ones, just to try to rest. So thanks for talking about this. We just haven't really talked about this as a culture of caring for the people that are caring for the really fragile ones.
Thanks, Janet. Thanks so much. I think it's really important just to say that how stress can just build up on you without you noticing, and then have so many kind of consequences that you just don't realize that they're connected.
I don't want it to happen to any of you.
Oh, sure. I don't see more comments coming in, so what I suggest that we do is move over to the next portion, which is a stillness exercise guided by Gary. What I would say is that unless you're driving, stop what you're doing. If you're on a push bike, maybe you just jump off the bike right now and take a moment to take part. Gary, could I ask you to?
Thank you. Yes, Rahzeb. Just before I'd just like to make one short comment, and that is I really resonated, Rahzeb, with the lack of touch. I'm a hugger, and I have to be told sometimes by my wife Liz that I shouldn't be hugging everybody, and so I really miss that. Trying to give virtual hugs doesn't quite make it. There's something about the immediacy of human being to human being in a hug, and maybe someday we'll be able to get back to some of that in a safe way. The stillness practice that I can suggest is one of many, as I've mentioned before. This one can be found in my book. I'm not telling everybody to run out and buy my book, but some of these are in the book, and quite straightforward in terms of instructions. It can be done either seated or standing. And if you're either way, you start with your arms relaxed by your side, with your palms turned out. You try to relax your elbows. In Tai Chi, this is from Tai Chi, you never lock your joints. Your joints are always loose. So you have your elbows loose. And the other thing to try to do is not use your shoulders. Most of us are used to lifting our shoulders when we lift our arms. And believe me, it does take some practice, at least it did for me. My teacher kept going around saying, stop that, stop using your shoulders. So it takes some practice, but you can do that. So if you start like that, take a breath and lift your arms up. You know, I'll do it too, but I don't know if anybody can see from what I'm doing. Raise your arms as you take a breath in, just to about shoulder height. Turn your palms over. I'll do it a couple of times with you. Turn your palms over, and then slowly let your arms float back down to your side. Okay, so first take a deeper breath you can with your palms facing up. Lift up, keeping your shoulders relaxed, up about shoulder height. Turn your palms over so they're facing down. And then breathing out slowly, let your arms float down, kind of like you're trailing through water. Let's try, say, 2 more times just to get the idea. So lifting, palms up, faced up, lifting up towards the shoulders. That's it. Turn over, float back down. Okay. 1 more time. Turning the palms up, breathing in as you come up. Turn the palms over, float back down. So there are several things going on here. You're trying to pay attention to the movements of your arms going up and down, trying to coordinate that with your in-breath and your out-breath, and you're having to pay attention gently, pay attention to that, all of which helps bring you to the present moment and hopefully an experience of stillness. The breathing, the soft movement, and the coordination. Many of us, it doesn't happen right away for everybody, but many times I've given this exercise to groups at a convention, for example. Many people come up after and say, huh, I've never done anything like that before. This is quite nice. So you can refine the practice, as we say in Tai Chi, but you're gradually just gently working with your breath. So don't force your breath. Just go with your own breath in terms of lifting the arms, turning over, and going back down again. I also call this one the wave. So you can also visualize a wave coming in and out, if you like, with the sound of your breath. That's a stillness practice. Thanks, Rahzeb.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. So what I'd like to ask is, Gary, that you just share a few concluding words, and if you could encourage participants to understand and explore their own ways, of finding stillness before we close. That be okay?
Sure. I think really to emphasize some things that have been mentioned is that stillness, we haven't talked about mindfulness or stillness, but they're not very different, is there. It's part of our being, our human being. And so it's natural, and it's a little different because what we need to do is not do something rather than trying to figure it all out with our logic and our techniques. We need to do the opposite, which is just to stop, take a breath. And since it's already there, it's a matter of showing up for it, and it will gradually lead you. You're really not in control of this process except to be there for it, and it takes you along. And so I'm very optimistic for all of us, because you can find this. And as one of the teachers says, if you're under a lot of stress, try it twice instead of once. Because we need it more when we're under more stress. So it is a hopefulness about these times, and speaking for myself too, I have my own challenges about trying to find stillness right now. But I just do my practice. I just say, okay, whatever's going on, I'm just going to do my practice the best I can and let things happen. So I think those would be my ending remarks, that it's natural, it's there, it's available to all of us. We just need to try be going in a slightly different direction than we're used to.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Gary. Okay, so I feel really privileged to have the opportunity to take part in this session today. I think it's these things that we've been talking about have certainly helped me personally in my life. If you want to know a little bit more about Gary's book, I would suggest that you go to pathwaystostillness.org. I've also started reading the book, and I really found it very helpful. It's just so down to earth, and the chapters are short and to the point, and that's really always helpful to me. My concentration span is not always the best. Thanks so much. If you have any questions, you're very welcome to send them via email, perhaps to ashley@personcentereduniverse.com. And as we've mentioned, there will be a takeaway, a short resource, which will summarize some of the thoughts that have been shared today and provide links to other resources so you can get a little bit of a kickstart or help investigating and finding your own way. Just have a comment from Melody O'Neill. I'll just read it out if that's okay, Melody. I've heard float therapy is a very good practice for stillness. I haven't had the opportunity to try it. Have any of you tried this practice? I haven't. I once bought a present for somebody. It was highly recommended, and they went and did the float therapy here in Amsterdam, and I think they found it a bit too, they weren't really ready for it. They wanted to come out just really being like still, but it just slowed them down and they didn't want that. So it works.
I haven't tried it, but I'm going to do it. It's on my June bucket list of things to do.
Yeah, I have a friend, sorry, I was just going to say, I have a friend who swears by float therapy. She uses it to manage some of her anxieties. She's a chief financial officer at a large organization. So she is the tried and true. She believes it's tried and true to help with her anxiety.
Okay, yeah, good to know.
I just didn't want to end off without thanking you all very much and saying that it's such a privilege to again to work with you all, and thank you very much again for having me here.
Thank you so much, Gary.
Thanks so much.
We did want to share too, just before we leave, that Gary has been so thoughtful in sharing one of his signed books for us. So you can look forward to the follow-up email, including a little, we'll be doing a short draw for the winner of the book. So we'll mail it to you. It might take a little while and you might need to quarantine it, but as soon as you do, you'll have lots of opportunities to practice stillness.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, everyone. I think that pick me up, pick me from the hand. Okay, so I think we're all more armed for this marathon that we're taking part in. Good day, everyone. Thanks so much for joining.
Bye.
Thank you, panelists.
Yes.
Thank you.
Jim, Ashley.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.